Hi everyone, today is January 9, and this is the kickoff call for Bounded Context Working Group. Thanks everyone for the interest, for participating, and for joining the call. So let's see, I've got some people need to be admitted. Okay, so first of all, I just provided the agenda uh, in the meeting link, and we also have a Slack channel. There's like also the handbook page for the bounded context. I forgot to link also, there is a architecture design doc for modular monolith. So this working group is the initial step for to looking more globally eventually to modular monolith. But first of all, we need to we realized as what we were working and thinking about the modular monolith that we need to have a list of bounded context, a list of way of compartmentalize the code base that is consistent, that uses like very specific rules, and is not just like name it the way you want, but it needs to follow a very specific architecture. And then it doesn't have to be a very rigid system, but so this is going to be part of this working group to figure out also the process of adding bounded context or editing and removing bounded context eventually. Yeah, so the main goal, which will be also the exit criteria, is to identify a list of bounded contexts for the backend code base, so that we can understand what are the major domains that are interacting with each other within the GitLab Rails code base, and eventually in the future we will be able to have dependency diagrams and have a better understanding of how the system interacts with each other. So yeah, we will expect to have a list of bounded context that we document, and everyone, if we want to add a new class or if there's any refactoring, we follow this list. And we have a process to maybe add new ones if new domains are emerging, or we decide to do some refactorings and maybe join some bounded context together. Like as we work on the modular monolith, there will be moments where things need to be refactored, maybe things need to be joined together. We realize two things are too closely related, so we need to have a process in place for that. But initially we want to do a classification of what we have in the code base and understand from there like what the bounded contexts are. So this will be kind of in general the activity we are thinking of doing. Again, this will be then the collective work. So if we think there is something we can do differently, or anyone has different ideas, we can discuss and work it out together. Some challenges we might find obviously will be some classes. There are like God classes that are very difficult to categorize, like project, user, and I think we need to use in this case more like a best effort, try to figure out what kind of bounded context they can belong, and eventually, in the future, this kind of concept might need to be broken down into more kind of a specific aspects. But yeah, these will be some of the challenges we might find, but we can consider those as a kind of special case, and then have dedicated discussions about that, like how we want to tackle those. So yeah, before I go further, is there any kind of questions? Let's jump on some of the questions, and then we look more specifically into the activity. So Harmet, you have the first question.
Yep, sure. Like mine is pretty straightforward. I think one thing that wasn't very clear to me when like as we start now is do we start by classifying the code base files first, or are we going to like put together a list of the bounded contexts and then like use it to classify the code base files. I wasn't so sure like which one do we start with.
Yeah, we had kind of discussions, I think with Chad initially. So when we were working on the bounded on the modular monolith design doc, we come up with a definition. I think I answer to the next question, kind of is probably related to yours as well. But we have a definition of bounded context we came up with. Again, this can be subject to change, and as we do some discussions. But I can even share my screen. We have a definition bounded context. Like what makes a bounded context. So we figured out that, okay, product categories, it's probably the most kind of stable way we can use to identify bounded context. Yeah, it's true that bounded product categories can change ownership, can be moved from one team to another one, but it's they're more stable than naming things after stages or other ways. So so this would be kind of the initial idea for identifying bounded context, and then we can look into, can we group things together? If there are some of them are kind of too small, too very specific, they actually maybe need to be grouped together, or maybe need to be split down, broken down into separate bounded contexts. The other kind of aspect is like, I think if I have an example somewhere. See, for example, we might have different namespaces, and we might find in the code base, like for example, abuse, spam, security orchestration, security orchestration, for example. So we might find that maybe some of these are kind of related to the same thing. So there is no right or wrong approach. Like we need to start with the named bounded context and then feed the files in. But sometimes it can be, otherwise it would be like a chicken egg kind of a situation. But we can use the structure, the files, and also the existing namespaces to say, okay, this maybe like everything can be put under security, and we can create a bigger bounded context. It makes sense, for example, okay, to do something like that. There's some guidelines for modularizations where the module should be deep and not too shallow. So we should like avoid creating things like really like a small namespace that fits just a few classes in it, but we need to create something that's like a bit deeper, where there's a lot more private concepts inside it, and like and less kind of a public concepts, like service objects and kind of models. But again, this is like a process we can figure out together and discuss and say, okay, I come up with this kind of I've looked at the structure. I think this makes sense to have this kind of bounded context. What does other people think? So we can have discussions about this, and we can translate this into documentation in our process to say, okay, these are the things we should be using for identifying bounded context. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
I just added a point. So first of all, I apologize for being late, and if this has already been discussed. Just wondering, how are we planning to essentially enforce these boundaries? Are we going to use just private methods, or are we going to use something like the Packwork? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so this will be kind of a and the next phase of the modular
I guess
monolith. Sorry, Sean. I'm not sure if I heard the full question. So the question is like, how do we enforce bounded context?
Yeah, sorry. What? Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So the scope of this working group is currently just we want to make a very specific and narrow scope, so we can kind of have a very specific goal initially, and is to identify bounded context. Then the next phase will be this could be repurposing the refocusing the working group to have like an additional goal, or even disband this group and create a new one. But the next step will be eventually to have a more structured approach for development. So it will be how do we protect boundaries? Do we use pack work? So there's some POCs in place, or do we need to introduce even some Rubocop cops, for example, to I think there's see, there is a part of here, exit criteria is specified. Yeah, it's like a follow-up from this working group could be to, for example, create a Rubocop cop to enforce top-level namespaces. So if we have a list of them and you introduce a new module that is not part of this list, you will, you will get a violation. This would be in more like a follow-up. Or if we realize we want to include as part of this scope, it's totally fine by me. But yeah, there could be like follow-ups that to look more in the long term for the modular monolith.
Okay, great. Yeah, because in fact, the reason I was interested in this working group is that I think generally the code at GitLab is actually very clean. We have a lot of effort to ensure review process, review costs, etc. But the challenge that a lot of engineers have, particularly new employees, is the scale of all these classes and space and the be you along the group. But still hear me? I've got a few people frozen. But yeah, so I guess that I think we have almost a unique challenge because of the scale of GitLab, and I think it's a great working group.
Yeah, exactly. So it's supposed to solve the problem of scale of newcomers to the code base as well. So Smriti, you have the next question. I think I answered, but like you can verbalize if you want.
Yeah, no, I think I kind of got an answer because the earlier question was also similar. So I understood that primarily we are focusing on product categories to create the definition of bounded context. Otherwise, we will look into the grouping things together. So yes, I could understand it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We do have some product categories that are really specific. I think we have like a browser performance is like a category, but this will be, so some of them could be grouped together. If we realize they are too shallow of bounded context, we can decide even to group them together. But yeah, the general rule is we can start from product categories and then refine the process from there. And Cassie's question was answered. Gabriel, you have next two questions.
Yeah, the first one is more like a comment. For the things that are hard to put into a specific box, for example, the project, eventually like the team's namespace and every like major entity that either is defined a shard or a customer or a group or something like that. I think it makes sense for us to have like a core or platform, or I hate the term shared because it doesn't mean anything, but have something like core that defines like the kernel of the system. That makes sense to have that from the beginning. And the other one is more like a challenge for us. There is like a very good motivation for us to try to split code as this is your team code, this is your other team code. And then when teams mix their responsibility, or new things are created, or teams are combined or split, then you have this problem reflected in the code base. You either refactor everything to reflect your new organization chart, or you start to have like a sort of a mess. So ideally, you would think that the separation not as per team small kingdom, but as a system should be, not as the organization actually reflected.
Can I just add a comment there? The way I understand the feature category is some groups have only a single feature category and some groups have multiple. And it's possible for a feature category to be moved to another group. So in the case of source code, the group's called source code, and then the feature category is called source code management. There was previously a category for LFS, which got merged into source code management. Although you could make an argument that it would be better to keep them separate so that it could be moved around. But I wanted to also add another point to your earlier point, Gabriel, about the shared category idea. There is definitely shared code, and it's something that we struggle with at GitLab because we don't have like a shared or core group. There's no core group, but there is code that's shared, and the challenge is that from an engineering management perspective is when an issue comes in and it's not owned, well then no one owns it. And so I think even with the shared stuff, we should, if possible, try and somehow link it to a group, even if that might not be a popular decision.
We should have a core group.
We should have a core group.
I think 5 years ago it was called Platform. That's exists. So this is a problem with the organization, not with the code, too, as I understand.
For sure, I agree. That it would be very sensible to have a platform or some other shared group.
Yeah. It's a good point, and part of this
Can I jump in there?
is also to Chad, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. First, I'd like to respond to that point, but I think in terms of the mechanics of this group, that's a really good question. It's like, yes, obviously we'll have shared or platform code or whatever we call it. But then there's also the question of what do we do with things that we're just not sure about yet? Perhaps we leave them uncategorized, or perhaps we put them in a placeholder category. Stepping back in general, I would really suggest that we lean on the expertise of other people that have done this. For example, Shopify and Gusto. And under the action items, I've linked the Ruby Rails modularity Slack. There's a lot of really smart people that have struggled with these exact problems. So we shouldn't try to reinvent the wheel. We should, read Stephen Hageman's book and ask questions in that Slack and get inspiration of how other organizations of our size and Rails code bases of our size have struggled and tackled these problems. To the second point, yeah, like the conversation sort of went into the next question, like how do we deal with the impedance mismatch between an organization chart and whatever we figure out around who owns the code. And like we're obviously going to have code that nobody owns, like a shared common library, test libraries, like everything like that. And again, that's in this category of things we really should deal with as a company. We should, and this will help make it clear, like we have 100,000, 200, 400,000 lines of code that nobody owns. Perhaps we should consider dedicating some engineers to be responsible for that code. And I'm hoping that this sort of conversation will make those decisions clearer to upper management to say, hey, nobody owns this, and it's a risk to the company if nothing else.
Yeah, I think I agree that the approach should be to make it clear that there is a problem rather than trying to work around the problem just to fit into whatever we decide to. I think it's clear to make it very, very clear that this is a problem.
Yeah, see, this is the exact point and goal also of this working group. So with this exercise, we can highlight these areas, important areas of the code base that are currently not owned. And everything, every bounded context, every module, whatever we want to call it eventually, then you have to have owners. And owners doesn't mean, silos. It means like stewards of that part of the code base, that expert, they have the most of the context, that they know what refactoring makes sense, what doesn't make sense. So, and we need to, we need to have this for everything. Even if we end up extracting some of the parts of the platform code, for example, into gems, there has to be owners even for gems and things like that. So at least we know like a main point of contact, which again, everyone can still contribute. You can still open merge requests to modify different parts of the code base, but it's good to understand also what are the parts that are currently not owned.
And just to jump in again, the link that I dropped recently in the group about GitHub's service owners, like they're recognizing the limitations of code owners, for example, as a way to do that, and introducing a meta concept of mapping code to groups of people that don't necessarily have to match an organization chart. It's just a YAML file who are responsible for that code. And like, I would imagine that was a direction we would definitely consider going, especially considering our main competitor is going that way too.
Yep, yeah, that's definitely. With regard to the, I want to maybe go back to the activity. So, well, the idea we had initially was we classify files of, if things are well namespaced already, we don't need to go through all the files. We just look at directory structure and we say, okay, this can all fit into a specific bounded context, or certain files from this location actually belong to other things, and we need to consider those to be eventually maybe be extracted. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate work. I want to make sure we don't have to really kind of make sure you don't miss any files or things like that. It's more like, let's get like a general picture of the code base. Let's have a look at what the bounded contexts are. Are there multiple modules that we should consider merging, for example? These are the kind of the questions and the goals we need to look at, and rather than try to be too precise, file by file base. Does it make sense?
I have one more comment to make about that. I think I have a cleaner idea now of what I was trying to say. If we define the context, even if there is no clear owner, I think we should define a context that makes sense to be defined as its own. So we can try to find who should own that later, but let's try to make it reasonable.
Yes. Yeah, there could be parts of the code base that maybe have changed ownership, or like I'm thinking like a monitor, for example. If things have changed a lot, we might not know. We might not have a team that directly will be responsible for that. But I think it makes sense to still say, okay, there is a bounded context here that we are seeing. It doesn't matter, which team owns this. We need to look at the code first. Cool. So the main things to look at will be backend files. We exclude the specs. We look at app and lib, and especially from lib, we look at code that is like backend code that is related to domain, and not as a kind of platform code. So we need to look at this, and even like we will for sure, can start to have a platform context initially, meaning like, where do we put all the base classes or things that are actually used across different things? Might be the platform module, as we want to call it. And then from there, we can even look, we can even zoom in later on to say, okay, this platform is too big. There's maybe a lot of things inside. Are there like main themes we can extract, and maybe there could be separate responsibilities, more, like core part of responsibilities and infrastructure level responsibilities. We can even break this down. But yeah, initially we can look at separation between platform code and domain code, and then for the domain code, we look at the various bounded context. Okay, so we are almost at time, and I want to make sure we can have the next steps. So I was thinking, I don't know, we start with a spreadsheet, but I don't want to make it like, millions of rows. So we need to look into a way that we can do maybe looking at directory structure first. So at least I think directory structure should be sufficient to understand bounded context. We don't need to look at every file. So maybe we can start from that. I can look into exporting that into a spreadsheet, and we can categorize that way. We can split the work around, and every member will look at part of the code base that they are most familiar with, and we can, in the next sync, we can discuss and raise questions and discuss challenges and how we can move forward with how we can make progress.
And just to recap the action items, I dropped two reference materials. One is the Slack channel I referred to, where people working on these sorts of things congregate, and the second one is the second book about modularizing Rails by Stephen Hageman. The first one is about engines, and most people have realized engines aren't the way to go. Packwork is the way to go. That's the point of this book, but there's also a lot of context about why we would even need to do this as a prerequisite, which is the purpose of this group. And then I put down, Fabio, you're going to make the spreadsheet. So that's the next action item and probably good for this group or for this meeting.
Yep, sounds good. And
thanks, everybody. This is going to be fun. I'm psyched.
I'm going to schedule a call, maybe a slightly different time frame to be mindful of other people next week, and then maybe we can discuss async if we want to have what kind of cadence we want to have, but we can start initially weekly and then maybe spread it out. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.